Why would someone forgive the people actively torturing them to death? On that cross 2,000 years ago, Jesus spoke words that defied every human instinct. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." But here's what most people miss. This wasn't just spiritual. There were 3 specific psychological mechanisms at play that were so powerful, they literally changed the course of human history. What you're about to discover will completely transform how you understand the human capacity for transcendence under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The truth about these 3 psychological forces will shock you. Here's what most people completely misunderstand about the crucifixion. They think Jesus' forgiveness was some kind of supernatural miracle that ordinary humans could never achieve. But that's exactly backwards. The psychological reality is far more profound and terrifying than any miracle. When someone is experiencing the most extreme physical torture known to human civilization, nails driven through nerve clusters, suffocation cycles lasting hours, public humiliation designed to break the spirit, the brain's default response is rage, revenge fantasies, and desperate self-preservation. Every documented case of extreme torture shows the same pattern. Victims either break mentally, develop intense hatred for their tormentors, or dissociate completely from reality. But Jesus did something that neuropsychologists call impossible. Under duress, he maintained not just cognitive function, but actually expanded his psychological processing to include empathy for his executioners. Think about this. Roman crucifixion was specifically designed to destroy the victim's humanity. The slow death, the public nakedness, the mockery, every element was calculated to reduce a person to their most primitive survival instincts. Yet at the moment when any rational human would be consumed with pain and fury, Jesus engaged in what psychologists now recognize as the highest form of cognitive processing, perspective-taking and moral reasoning about people who were actively causing his agony. This psychological anomaly is so rare that it appears in less than 0.1% of extreme trauma cases. Here's the psychological mechanism that makes this possible, and it's going to change how you see human potential forever. What Jesus demonstrated on the cross was something psychologists call metacognitive transcendence, the ability to step outside your immediate experience and operate from a higher-order thinking system, even under extreme stress. But here's the key. This wasn't spontaneous. Historical accounts show Jesus had been preparing his psychological architecture for exactly this moment through years of specific mental training. The first mechanism was cognitive reframing under duress. While his body was being destroyed, Jesus' mind was actively reinterpreting the event. Instead of seeing people hurting me, he saw people trapped in ignorance. This isn't just positive thinking. Neuroscience shows this requires massive prefrontal cortex activation while the amygdala is flooding the system with fight-or-flight chemicals. It's like performing calculus while your house is burning down around you. The second mechanism was empathic extension in crisis. Most trauma victims experience what's called psychological narrowing. Their world shrinks to just their pain. But Jesus expanded his psychological field to include his mother, the thief beside him, even the soldiers gambling for his clothes. He was literally growing his circle of concern while dying. Brain imaging shows this requires extraordinary activation of the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain's empathy center, while pain systems are maxed out. The third mechanism was future-oriented meaning-making. Even as he was dying, Jesus was constructing a narrative that transformed his death into something purposeful. Psychologists know that meaning-making is one of the most powerful tools for surviving trauma, but doing it in real time while experiencing that trauma is nearly impossible. Jesus wasn't just enduring the crucifixion. He was actively transforming it into something that would heal rather than destroy. Let me put this in terms you'll never forget. Imagine you're a computer programmer and someone is slowly destroying your computer while you're trying to write the most important code of your life. As each component fails, the keyboard breaks, the screen cracks, the hard drive crashes. Instead of panicking or raging, you somehow manage to keep coding, to keep creating something beautiful and functional. Not only that, but you actually start writing code to help the person who's destroying your machine. That's what Jesus did psychologically. While his physical systems were shutting down under torture, his mind not only stayed online, but actually upgraded its operations. He ran empathy software while his pain processors were overloaded. He executed forgiveness protocols while his threat detection systems should have been screaming danger. He maintained complex social reasoning while his basic survival functions were failing. This is why the crucifixion broke history. It wasn't just about religious beliefs. It demonstrated a level of psychological evolution that most humans thought impossible. Jesus proved that even under the worst conditions imaginable, the human mind could choose transcendence over survival, compassion over revenge, meaning over despair. He essentially hacked the deepest levels of human psychology and showed there was a way to upgrade our mental operating system beyond what we thought were our natural limitations. The ripple effects of witnessing this level of psychological mastery spread across cultures because it revealed new possibilities for human consciousness itself. If this is exploding your head, leave your like so more people can discover these hidden truths. But wait, because the second case is even more shocking. But here's where the story gets even more psychologically complex, and most people completely miss this layer. While Jesus was displaying impossible levels of individual psychological mastery, he was simultaneously running a completely different psychological program, one that psychologists call group leadership under terminal stress. Think about this. He wasn't just managing his own psychological state during torture, he was actively managing the psychological states of everyone around him. His mother was watching her son die. His disciples had scattered in terror. The thief next to him was having a spiritual crisis. The centurion was beginning to question everything he'd been taught about power and authority. Here's what's mind-blowing. Trauma psychology tells us that when someone is in extreme distress, they become completely self-focused. It's called pain narrowing. Their entire psychological universe shrinks to just their own suffering. Every resource gets redirected to survival. Yet Jesus was doing the exact opposite. Even while dying, he was conducting a masterclass in psychological leadership, helping each person around him process their own emotional trauma. He comforted his mother by ensuring she'd be cared for. He promised the repentant thief a place in paradise, essentially providing therapeutic hope to someone in despair. He even managed the crowd's emotional state, turning potential mob energy into something approaching reverence. This is leadership at a level that modern psychology barely understands. He was running multiple complex social programs simultaneously while his biological systems were failing. It's like being the conductor of an orchestra while having a heart attack and somehow making the music more beautiful than it's ever been. Here's the psychological mechanism that made this impossible feat possible, and it's going to revolutionize how you think about leadership forever. What Jesus demonstrated was something psychologists now call transcendent social processing, the ability to expand rather than contract your social awareness during personal crisis. But this wasn't just innate ability. It was the result of what we now recognize as revolutionary psychological training. The first element was distributed emotional regulation. Instead of managing just his own emotions, Jesus was actively managing the emotional states of multiple people simultaneously. When his mother was breaking down, he redirected her grief into purpose by connecting her with John. When the thief was dying in despair, he transformed that despair into hope With a single promise, he was essentially becoming a psychological anchor for everyone in his vicinity, providing stability while his own world was collapsing. The second element was crisis communication mastery. Every word Jesus spoke from the cross was precisely calculated for maximum psychological impact. "My God, why have you forsaken me?" This wasn't despair. It was modeling emotional honesty. It gave permission for others to voice their own doubts and fears. "It is finished." This provided closure and meaning to witnesses who were struggling to make sense of what they were seeing. Each phrase served multiple psychological functions for different people. The third element was transformational narrative creation. Jesus wasn't just dying. He was actively creating a story that would heal the psychological trauma his death was causing to observers. He transformed what should have been a narrative of defeat and injustice into one of willing sacrifice and ultimate victory. Psychologists know that how we frame traumatic events determines their long-term psychological impact. Jesus was doing real-time narrative therapy for an entire crowd while experiencing the trauma himself. This level of social psychological sophistication while under extreme duress is so rare that modern psychology has no other documented cases quite like it. Picture this: you're the captain of a ship, and the ship is sinking in a massive storm. But instead of focusing only on your own survival, you're simultaneously managing the panic of the passengers, coordinating the crew, calming terrified children, helping elderly passengers find life vests, and somehow making everyone feel safer, even as the ship goes down. Not only that, but you're doing it so masterfully that people actually become less afraid, more connected to each other, and start believing that even if the ship sinks, something beautiful will come from it. That's exactly what Jesus did psychologically during the crucifixion. While his own ship was sinking, his body failing, his life ending, he was managing the psychological emergency happening in everyone around him. He was the emotional lifeguard for his mother's drowning grief, the spiritual counselor for the thief's crisis of faith, the leadership model for his confused disciples, and the moral teacher for the Roman soldiers who didn't even know they needed teaching. But here's what makes this even more extraordinary. Most captains in crisis mode issue orders, try to control situations through authority and fear. Jesus did the opposite. He led through vulnerability, honesty about his own struggle, and by creating space for others to process their own emotions. He turned his personal catastrophe into a masterclass in human psychology that people are still studying 2,000 years later. The reason this broke history is that it showed leadership doesn't require control or invulnerability. True leadership, Jesus demonstrated, actually comes from the ability to remain emotionally available to others, even when you're experiencing your own worst nightmare. And subscribe now, because the third case that comes next will completely change your perspective on human nature. But now we get to the most psychologically complex and historically explosive aspect of all. And this is the one that literally shattered thousands of years of human behavioral programming. Here's what most people never realize. Jesus' forgiveness of his executioners wasn't just individual psychology or social leadership. It was something far more radical. It was the complete psychological reversal of humanity's most fundamental survival mechanism, the revenge cycle. For all of human history, societies had operated on a simple psychological principle. When someone hurts you, you hurt them back. This wasn't just personal preference, it was evolutionary hardwiring designed to prevent future attacks. Anthropologists call it reciprocal justice. The foundation of every legal system, every tribal code, every concept of fairness humans had ever developed. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The entire structure of civilization was built on the psychological principle that wrongdoing must be met with punishment. But here's where Jesus did something that psychologists call species-level behavioral innovation. Instead of following this universal pattern, he introduced a completely new psychological response to injustice: radical forgiveness. Not forgiveness after justice was served, not forgiveness after the wrongdoer apologized, but forgiveness in the moment of being wronged, offered to people who were still actively causing harm. This wasn't just personally revolutionary, it was a direct challenge to the deepest psychological programming of human civilization. Jesus was essentially saying, everything you think you know about justice, fairness, and human nature is wrong. There's a completely different way to process injustice that actually works better. This psychological innovation was so radical that it took centuries for human societies to even begin understanding its implications. Here's the psychological mechanism that made this world-changing innovation possible, and understanding it will transform how you see human evolution itself. What Jesus accomplished was something psychologists now call transcendent justice processing. The ability to break free from hardwired revenge programming and operate from an entirely different psychological framework. This required 3 simultaneous psychological breakthroughs that modern neuroscience is just beginning to understand. The first breakthrough was preemptive forgiveness activation. Normal forgiveness happens after the hurt stops and the wrongdoer shows remorse. Jesus activated forgiveness systems while the harm was still occurring, and the perpetrators felt justified in their actions. Brain imaging shows this requires overriding multiple limbic system responses simultaneously, suppressing revenge fantasies, blocking retaliatory planning, and maintaining emotional warmth toward active threats. It's like hugging someone who's stabbing you. The second breakthrough was perpetrator empathy expansion. Instead of seeing his killers as evil enemies, Jesus psychologically repositioned them as ignorant children who didn't understand the consequences of their actions. This wasn't denial. He clearly understood he was being murdered, but he managed to hold 2 contradictory psychological realities simultaneously: complete awareness of the injustice being done to him and complete compassion for those doing it. Psychologists call this metacognitive complexity, the ability to process multiple conflicting emotional truths without psychological fragmentation. The third breakthrough was transformational justice creation. Rather than seeking punishment for wrongdoing, Jesus created a completely new psychological framework where wrongdoing becomes the catalyst for grace. He essentially reprogrammed the justice algorithm from hurt requires hurt to hurt creates opportunity for healing. This wasn't just personal, it was a new psychological technology that could be applied to any conflict, any injustice, any human hurt. The historical impact was explosive because Jesus proved this new psychological framework actually worked better than revenge for creating lasting change and healing. Imagine humanity had been stuck using the same broken computer virus protection for thousands of years. Every time the system got attacked, the old program would launch a counterattack, fighting virus with virus, creating endless cycles of system damage. Societies would crash, relationships would be destroyed, and the fundamental operating system of human civilization kept getting corrupted by revenge loops that never really solved anything. Then Jesus introduced completely new psychological software. Instead of fighting the virus with another virus, his system converted the attacking virus into healing code. The same energy that was designed to destroy the system got transformed into something that actually strengthened and improved it. When people hurt him, instead of launching counterattacks that would create more damage, his psychological program converted that hurt into forgiveness that actually healed both the attacker and the victim. This was such a radical upgrade to human psychological software that it fundamentally changed how relationships, legal systems, and entire civilizations could operate. Instead of endless cycles of revenge and counter-revenge, humans suddenly had access to a completely different way of processing injustice, one that actually broke the cycle instead of perpetuating it. The reason the crucifixion broke history is that it was the first successful demonstration of this new psychological technology working under the most extreme conditions possible. Jesus essentially beta-tested revolutionary psychological software using his own death as the testing environment. And it worked so well that billions of people have been trying to download and install this same psychological upgrade for 2,000 years. It proved that human beings could evolve beyond their revenge programming and access a completely different level of consciousness. These three psychological breakthroughs, metacognitive transcendence under extreme duress, transcendent social leadership during personal crisis, and revolutionary justice processing that breaks revenge cycles, combined to create the most psychologically sophisticated response to injustice in human history. Jesus didn't just die. He demonstrated an entirely new level of human consciousness that proved our species could evolve beyond our most basic programming. If these three cases exploded your mind, smash the like button and subscribe to not miss our next mysteries. And tell us in the comments, which of these revelations surprised you most? Hit the bell so the algorithm doesn't lie to you. And if you know someone who needs to see this, share it. Because these truths need to be known. The human mind is far more powerful than we ever imagined. This analysis is speculative and based on historical accounts and psychological principles, not clinical diagnosis.